part of NCRR, which formed in 1980, but NCRR continues to this day. So the question is, what makes it continue to be relevant? Why does it continue? What were the things that made it so lasting? In the second panel, we'll talk more about that. But I did want to say that, you saw the clips of the commission hearings, which was really a key part, and that is on the DVD, both the whole 3-day hearings as well as selected testimonies, which you can get at the museum, and it will be sold in the lobby. So if you want to hear more about those testimonies, which is really, really, really critical in terms of the movement, that would be something to look forward to outside afterwards, as well as the book. To start the second part, we wanted to show you a short clip from Tales of Clamor, because Tracy Kato Kiriyama, who would have been on this panel if she were here, could not be because she's out of town, but she created this performance called Tales of Clamor, which many of you may have seen, I don't know, but she was so inspired by the commission hearings and what it took for people to testify that she created this performance that took the essence of what that was about. And even for us in NCR, we learned a lot by seeing that performance. So she and Kennedy Cabasares created the Tales of Clamor. They have a group called Pool Project, and it premiered at the Artani Theater earlier this year in February. And she was one of the people that related to NCR. She's sort of like younger than we are, not as young as the young people today, but she's sort of that bridge generation. And she could never say no to us whenever we asked her to do anything for us, like put together videos or performances. And so we really appreciate Tracy Kato Kiriyama. So we're going to show the Tales of Clamor short 3-minute video. Thank you.
Because of this evacuation, I really denied my children their Japanese heritage. I wanted to erase that part.
I felt ashamed because I loved my parent. I also loved America. I get goosebumps when I sing the Star-Spangled Banner. I believed what our teachers taught us about what a great country America is.
And make sure when they do join our country, Muslim registry is part of its anti-terror plans to isolate certain places of origin.
Pool Project Ensemble, in partnership with NCRR and JACCC, presents Tales of Clamor, a play that links past and present, analyzes the journey of 40 years of silence, and utilizes the road to redress as a case study for the collective clamor necessary for change today.
Tales of Clamor takes the audience on a cathartic journey through mixed media, theater, circus arts, and archival footage of the 1981 commission hearings.
He's asking all kind of questions and he's mad. He keeps wondering, well, how come you didn't say anything? How could you just go like sheep, no protest? And I tell him, we don't like talking about Ken. And I say nothing. Some of us, we just don't. I know he's angry, but right now he's angry at me. So maybe if I tell what happened, he'll stop being angry at me. He'll be angry for me. So, here. Can you help me write this?
Tomi Embry.
I am Sumiko Stale-Seki.
I am Tom P. Watanabe. My name is Tora Dave Matsuo.
My name is Vernon Yoshioka.
My name is Warren Tadashi Furutani.
I, William Maria Shigeta.
I am Yayoi Arika Ono.
My name is Yoshihiko Fred Fujikawa. I'm Yoshio Sinakamura.
Next panel, because we're trying to show what is the relevance of some of the work that we did in NCR and why, what are the principles and how does it affect activism today. So I'm going to call up the panelists, and we have 4 really interesting people that have had different experiences with the NCRR. The first panelist is June Hibino, if I can find her name here. She was active with NCR's 9/11 committee, so come on.
June Hibino.
June Hibino. We're getting old. That's another thing about being in an organization since 1980. You get a little old. So June Hibino, come on down. And she helped to build ties with the Muslim community. I should just read my notes. Through NCR's 9/11 committee, which organized the first Break the Fast, or iftars, based on NCR's principles of supporting others who are suffering from unjust actions. She was also active in NCR's support of Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who refused to deploy during the Iraq War, calling it an unjust war. Second panelist, Tony Osumi, is an activist artist, and he has worked with NCRR in different forms to Seigi in Little Tokyo, supported the New Otani workers, and is currently involved also. All of them are actually involved with Nikkei Progressives. So we will have a question at the end about Nikkei Progressives as a whole. And he has also organized his own programs, and he'll talk more about how NCR's involvement and his involvement, NCR has influenced that. The next one, Kristin Fukushima. She's the Little Tokyo Community Council Managing Director. And I'm going to call Sean Miura down here too, co-curator of the Tuesday Night Cafe. And both of them have, have related to NCR people or the organization, and have worked in Little Tokyo for quite a while. So we'd like them to talk more about the influence of the grassroots struggle in their work here. Kristin is involved with, First Street North, saving the First Street North, and preservation campaigns, and Sean has been organizing the long-running Tuesday night cafe program at the Union Center for the Arts. So we have a question for each panelist. First question, and we really do want it to be a conversation, so I'm not giving them 3 questions at once. I mean, 1 question. And so June.
Yes.
Okay, she was involved in San Francisco and in LA and in NCRR, and kind of really stayed involved throughout till today. And I wanted to ask her, what made her stay connected to NCRR, and what made her get re-engaged or engaged more deeply at different times?
Well, I guess I got involved in the whole redress campaign and NCRR, as she said, while I was living in San Francisco. And previous to that, I had been involved in the anti-redevelopment struggle in Japantown, Nihonmachi, up in San Francisco. And that, for me, was my first introduction into the Japanese-American community, because I was born and raised on the East Coast. My parents had settled there after the war. But I think for myself, it was also personal, because that was the time when I first talked to my parents about camps and learned a lot about what their experiences had been. So I felt like NCRR was like, when we first started organizing in San Francisco, it was just very similar to LA. I think it was the first time where people were coming forward. The generations were beginning to talk to each other, which had not happened for many years. And it was just this, tremendous movement of the whole community to try to seek justice. So that drew me in initially. Over the years, I was involved in the founding conference, and then I testified at the hearings in San Francisco, and continued to stay active throughout the 80s. Then in the 90s, I kind of got less active. I had, Sachi was born, and got involved in other things, I guess. But later, during the 90s, I did become interested in the Ralph Lazo project, which was another NCR project. It was a curriculum guide and also a film about this Mexican-Irish young person who went to Manzanar to be with his friends. And it was a really good example of a young person taking a stand, solidarity. You know, he knew the camps was wrong. So NCRR wanted to tell his story. So NCRR, along with Visual Communications, came out with a great film called The Ralph Lazo Story, I think, which is also available. Stand Up for Justice, sorry. But I think what I really appreciate about NCRR is its concern for other people and its stand in solidarity with other groups. After the bombing of the Twin Towers, 9/11/2001, a lot of people are young and maybe don't remember, but it was, I don't know, changed the whole political landscape. I feel like there was a lot of fear and anxiety, and the government was putting a lot of, promoting a lot of patriotism. There was this patriotic fervor. Young people were rushing to the military, what do you call it? Where they sign up to join the military. I mean, it was a very repressive atmosphere too. People who spoke out against the impending invasions of Afghanistan and later Iraq. They were called traitors. They were getting death threats, like Congresswoman Barbara Lee. She was the only one to oppose the invasion. She was getting death threats. So that was sort of the atmosphere at that time. And I think for Muslim Americans and South Asians and Arab Americans, you know, they already were facing anti-Muslim, discrimination. And, but after 9/11, it was on a whole different level. I mean, people were getting beaten and killed. Mosques were getting set on fire. So that's where, NCR took a really good stand, I feel, within 2 weeks, or about 2 weeks after 9/11. It took the initiative to organize a vigil right here in front of Janum that drew hundreds of people, and it commemorated the lives, people who lost their lives at the Twin Towers, but it also came out really strongly against Islamophobia and against the hate and violence that was being promoted, you know, throughout the country. So after that, how much time do I have? That was sort of the beginning of our work in this area. And we began to make contacts at the different mosques, reached out, asked people how we could support them, and that became the beginning of our iftars, right, the fast events. There was one in 2001, 2, 3, and 4, Senshin Buddhist Temple, and then the last one was at Higashi Temple. But those were the beginning ways that we reached out. We invited people from the Japanese American community and also from the Muslim American community to share a meal, learn about each other's cultures and history and religions. And those, they kind of stopped for a while, but those are now have continued again the last 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years, with Vigilant Love, which NCR is also a part of. So maybe I'll stop here.
Okay. Unfortunately, the visuals didn't come on as soon as they were supposed to, so a couple more photos should be shown. Just very quickly to say that, you know, while June talked about kind of like a slower period in the 90s, besides the religious denials, in the 90s, I guess a lot of us were sort of, it's like a time that we don't remember now because it's so different. But in that time, you know, we even had the chance to go visit, take a trip to Cuba, have a delegation going to Cuba. You know, we felt that, oh, now's the time to sort of build relationships with people, get to know things, we have our time to do that. This was August 2001, and then September 11th, 2001, we come back and it's like the world has changed. You know, so it was sort of back to getting involved and doing stuff again as NCRR. Yeah, and Tony was on that delegation to Cuba as well. And he's sort of like that middle generation, like Tracy Kato Kiriyama, sort of that bridge between ourselves and the much younger people like Sean and Kristin, who are even now not the young ones or younger ones. But he, even though he wasn't in NCR during the redress work, he always felt some connection, and he was part of Seigi. And I don't exactly know, but he's sort of an old soul in a way, like he almost thinks like a Nisei. But so tell me, what drew you to NCRR, and besides your uncle and aunt being key members, Dick and Jan Osumi, what else? What was it? What have you carried with you in your current work?
Thank you. That's a good question. I was raised by my, I spent a lot of time with my grandma. She was a Nisei. My grandma was a Yobi Issei. So I think, we go over there, she picked us up after school. So I think some of those Nisei qualities of, never throwing things away and things like that. Anyways, probably, if you think, how did I get involved in it? So probably, from the first, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, the first pilgrimage when I was 5 years old. My mom was a college student at UCLA and saw a flyer and said, hey, we should go, and told my dad. My dad's a sansei. And so in '72 we went, and I remember, so we got up very early. My mom's making mayonnaise, BLT sandwiches, but she's not putting mayonnaise. And I said, oh, I want mayonnaise on mine. She said, oh no, we can't put mayonnaise because where we're going, it's very hot. It'll spoil, you'll get sick. And I thought, my God, where's this place that it's so hot that you can't have a sandwich with mayonnaise? And so I think those are little seeds that got planted. And then I remember, hey, there was deals with food again. There was bugs one time in some cornstarch my grandma had, and she goes, "Oh, don't just pick them out." I said, "No, Grandma, there's bugs in there." She said, "Yeah, pick them out." That's what we did in camp. I said, "Oh my God, there are bugs." "Oh yeah." I said, "Oh God, this place is really bad." So anyways, NCR. I have an article in the book, so please buy it. And it's called something like Next Generation, the Impact of NCR on Younger People. I used to consider myself a younger person. Now I'm 52. I can't do that anymore so much. And I am kind of in the middle here. So, the NCR people, the Sansei and the Nisei are really kind of role models for me. And so the four things that I kind of separated that I thought they had impact on people like ourselves were four things. And the first one I'm going to say, and it's already been talked about, but I kind of grouped them up, was grassroots organizing from the bottom up. And I would say this along with some of the role models and the work that many of the NCR people did during the Asian American movement in the late 60s and early 70s. The same idea is that you work with the community. And I think, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking at the NCR, that the NCR fought for the evening commission hearings for working people. They also fought for translation services and so forth. And then again, went out in the community, had the meetings and worked with people. And I think that's a big impact of how I see organizing. And I think Tracy and Sean also, that you don't work with the people on the top, you work with the people on the bottom, and you reach out to them. Which kind of the second part is coalition building. Not just in J-Town, not solely in J-Town, but you're working with people, oppressed people, the people fighting for struggles. Chicanos, African Americans, Native Americans. If you look at NCR's history with Big Mountain and Koreatown workers, and Iwataki workers here in J-Town, which was Filipinos and Asians and Latinos, it's always whoever needs the help, you will support you and will reach out to you. And not just in a token way or in a one way, but also building coalitions, but building relationships with people, which I think is very important. That's the extra step I think is important. It's not just strategic, it's to build a different way of approaching and building a new world, I guess, in a sense. The other one is kind of democratic participatory leadership. NCR, if you've ever been to an NCR meeting, they vote on stuff, there's a lot of discussion, decisions aren't made by one person, there's a coordinating committee, there's rotating stuff, there's leadership. So there's a way that there's always an emphasis on gender, and now in the last 10 or 15 years there's also an emphasis, maybe even longer than that, on generational balance. And so those things are important. So the idea that someone is not just someone who's the leader and they get to say everything and make the speeches and so forth, but and I would say that would kind of, if you think about the redress movement, there was also trainings within membership to train people to go out and make speeches and so forth, because we needed more than just a few people who had that experience. And so that kind of building up leadership within. And I would also say that sometimes they had some struggles too. I don't know all the details of that. Some of it was a little before me. But I do remember, talking with Kathy here about, and Richard, I think, about some of the members weren't on board with Prop 187. That was the 1994 one that was really, terrible against immigrants. And so, until they had a big discussion with some of the members of NCRR, and then had made connections between. But this is what happened to us. We were illegal. We were told we were illegal, and so it got made. So when people came on board, and people changed their mind, they pushed forward from that. So that's really good. You don't isolate people. You don't kick them out, and so forth. I'm already out. Okay, the last one I would say is the role model for a life of activism. NCR is regular folks, working folks. They're not community organizer in the sense that they've got a union job or a community social service agency. They're just regular folks. A lot of them are teachers. I became a teacher. I wonder if that's a coincidence. But regular folks raising their kids, raising their families. And for us, especially people coming out of college, you go, how do I live a life of activism after school, after college? And so seeing them raise their kids, and so forth, getting advice when I had my own child, that's the idea that you can live your life, you can live a life of activism, of committed struggle for your whole life. And I think that's probably one of the, I would say maybe the biggest, as I get older, one of the biggest contributions NCR had on people like myself.
Well, both Kristin and Sean are really redress babies. They were born after the year that redress was won, or around there. So they have no real contact, or their learning really came through maybe school or other ways. So my question to Kristin is, and both of you eventually, would be, what was your first contact with NCRR in terms of your awareness, and how have you worked with NCR since then?
Thank you, Kathy. Speaking as a redress baby, I've never called myself in, probably won't again. So I did not grow up hearing about NCRR redress specifically, although I do think that I must have had some awareness because it wasn't a surprise when I started learning about it. But when I was in college, I had the opportunity to find some copies of Ghidra, which was the magazine, newspaper of the Asian American movement, mostly published here in LA. And I spent like an entire summer reading it when I was interning at the Pacific Citizen. And so I learned a lot about all the work that folks did during the Asian American movement, around J-Town Voice, and work to fight displacement in Little Tokyo, and then how that led to the formation of things like NCR and the fight for redress. And it was very, very inspirational, and I was really in awe to learn about all these things. And then later, I interned at the Japanese American Citizens League through the Nikkei Community Internship Project. And at that time, I was very lucky to meet a number of folks who I did not realize were part of Ghidra or the movement, but it was folks like Alan Nishio or Evelyn Yoshimura. I very distinctly remember Mike Madase, and you were just like, who is this person that is a big fan? And I was like, oh, I read all your articles. And then I think I then got to know people as actual people. So then later when I worked at JCL, we started a project with NCRR called Bridging Communities, which was a project bringing together high school youth from both the Japanese American community and American Muslim community to talk about shared experiences and similarities in the communities. And it was just really, I think for me, amazing to witness. As Tony was talking through his 4 points of what really stood out to him, I was like, oh, those are all the things I was going to say. But yes, a lifetime commitment to activism and really upholding these values. I think when you are younger, you think things like activism or social justice is like a youthful trend, and then you grow out of it. So to meet folks who had been doing this their whole life and were continuing to do so was sort of a light bulb moment for me of this is something you can really dedicate your life to, and there are many ways to do it, whether it is as a job or as a volunteer. So I was really compelled to learn that this is something that folks have been doing, and there's just so much to learn. A couple years after that, there's the Legacy of Japanese American Activism Conference, and I was pulled into working on a panel about the future. What was that panel? Or that
the next
wave of activism, something like that. And I worked on that with Kathy directly, and but I think just realizing that there were so many lessons from redress, for me. And that has really, I think, influenced the way I do my work. Tony also mentioned, you really stole all my points, Tony. I think I should have gone first, it's fine. Read your article. Read his article, it's great, buy the book. But one thing that Tony mentioned was centering those most marginalized. And again, that's something I really take to heart for Little Tokyo organizing and organizing in general, thinking about it is really easy with those with power and resources to say what they think and try to enact some kind of action around that. But for those who tend to be without less ability to have a voice or a say, I think it's really important that we go out to those folks and make sure they have the opportunity to say what is important for them. And so that's something that I did not realize how much it was shaped by NCR, but really all the folks around me are kind of from NCR and did help shape that. So I realized I have 30 seconds left. So I will just say that I have not directly worked with NCR that much, but all the folks from NCR have always surrounded me in my life. So I mean the NCR, the organization, but I've always worked with folks from NCRR. And they have really shaped me in profound ways that I did not realize until I was thinking about what I would say on this panel. Until this very moment. And how that much is ingrained into the work I do for my day-to-day or the work I do outside of my day job. So yes, I'm really grateful for everything NCR has done. Thank you for everything. It's been great. And that's my time.
Okay. Thank you, Kristin. Sean, same question about how you first related to NCR, but also how maybe it's impacted, or if it hasn't, impacted your work with Tuesday night and the cultural work you do as well.
Yeah, no, not at all. That's my time. No. I'd like to actually start by saying I would love to, Tony, have you ever thought of writing like a cookbook?
Yeah.
I think that you should. I would read that cookbook, just like of your life told through recipes. So, hey, I'm Sean. How's it going, everybody? How are y'all doing today? Good, all right, good. Sunday afternoon. So I didn't grow up in SoCal. I grew up in, I was born in Seattle, then I grew up in Vancouver and then New Jersey. But my mom had been somewhat engaged with redress up in Seattle. So I grew up knowing about the legacy of Japanese American organizing that had happened. And when I was 12, we moved to New Jersey, August 2001. And then a month later, in September 2001, we heard a low-flying plane over my high school, and that was 9/11. My high school was what was called a bedroom community for New York, so that meant that a lot of people lived in my town, but then would commute into the city to work. So my town was deeply affected by what happened on 9/11 in many, many ways. So my best friend at the time was actually a Muslim American girl who lived right around the corner from me, and I remember her telling me that she was starting to have nightmares. I remember her telling me that someone had come up to her in school and told her to stop crashing planes to our buildings, quote unquote. My dad was on the train to work, and he had someone yell at him about 2 days after 9/11. He had been a cancer survivor himself. And then about a week later, I was reading the newspaper and read about Balbio Singh Sodhi, who was a gas attendant, I believe, in Texas, who had been murdered because he was wearing a turban. So it was around that time that I was starting to put all these pieces together, and I was starting to better understand my own family's history and context. So kind of like super angry preteen, a teenager on the internet, just reading. And in my first 2 months out here, I believe I ended up at the Erin Matata rally. And so I went to the Erin Matata rally as a freshman in college, and that was kind of my first exposure to NCRR in the flesh. That was the first time I met Tracy Kato Kiriyama. That was the first time I met Nobuko Miyamoto. That was the first time I met, I think Quetzal performed. So it was kind of like this funny moment that I sort of put a pin in. And then for the rest of my life, it's kind of been trailing me. So the Erin Matata rally was a really big moment for me. Not only was that the first, I think, organized action I'd ever taken part in, but that sort of became like something that I carried on. So through my time in college, I was like desperately trying to get people to Little Tokyo from campus. I was getting more involved with like Japanese American organizing on campus. I was getting really into Asian American art, so I was learning a lot about like pro-people work through like Filipino American artists, musicians who were doing work that was very much around anti-imperialism. So I was building this vocabulary, and eventually when I graduated, so I had an internship at Visual Communications. when I was at Visual Communications, I began volunteering for Tuesday Night Cafe, which is a free Asian American art series which shows every first and third Tuesday of the month, which is itself, I think, a byproduct of NCRR as well in some ways. And so I started volunteering there, and I'm currently now the producer and the curator. And it's been about 10 years now. So through that work and through that process, I think one thing I've always thought about is the ways that I've had vocabulary and language and context that's informed the work that I do and allowed me to do the work that I do. I think it's organizations like NCRR that have really afforded me that education and afforded me that structure and that language. I take a lot from the redress story. I think that there's a lot to be taken. I think there's a lot to be understood and a lot that can help us figure out how we move forward. I think a lot about all of the different organizations and people and conversations that went into that success and the ways that it really was like a multi-tactic approach to meeting one need and one goal. So I think a lot about that now, especially as we are a community that is becoming more and more diverse in thought and geography and approach. And I think a lot about how if we are going to make change, if we are going to enact change, we have to be working together, understanding that there are different tactics and different ways in.
Because I think, well, we have a number of young people, which is really great. They're very skilled at social media. And because of social media, we're able to, draw a larger group of people around us more quickly to come out to different events and stuff. But I feel that still, you also need to have the what do you call it? I guess the organizing, the one-on-one, working together with people, involving people, thinking about ways that people can contribute and feel a part of the struggle. And that there has to be that kind of dynamic of working together. Because I think social media has its limitations too, and it doesn't really include that part of organizing. So that's sort of often a tangent, but I think that's one of the things that Nikkei Progressives is trying to do, is trying to be a progressive voice in our community that is also part of a larger progressive movement for social justice in this country. Any other comment?
Yes. No, I agree with what Tony and June are saying. I think that, well, one, there is a question of, is there still a need for there to be a progressive voice and a progressive body and an active one at that, in the Nikkei community? And I think for us, especially the younger generation, we felt like the answer was definitely yes. And we felt that before 2016, before the election of President Trump. But in particular, as that happened, we said we want to make sure that we continue that legacy of there being an active, organized voice speaking on progressive values in the country, in our community, and we want to make sure that work continues because it is something we're really proud of. This legacy going back to the Nisei Progressives, which is kind of what our name is also a call to, and then as well as all the work that folks did during the movement, and then with redress, and then all the work that happened afterwards. And I think part of the reason that NP was formed is that it's a tradition of Japanese Americans to create another organization, but then also just that we knew that this work, we wanted to see it continue, and I think it's a question of like, what is the way that makes the most sense? We didn't want to force NCR to do things that maybe they're like, we've been doing this for 30, 40 years, we are ready to, write our book, we're ready to continue our legacy, but we're not ready for full-blown campaigns or full-blown continue that level of work because it takes a lot of time and energy, and they're ready for the next generation to take on the reins. And so it's not to supplant, but really to just augment and further continue. Yeah, I see us as related organizations. We still do a lot together. We've had retreats together. And we've been co-sponsors on things, and I think the hope is that we continue to take guidance and work from NCR, but also just they can feel rest assured that this work is continuing in the hands of another generation.
Let's open it up. Any other questions out there? We have any other questions out there? Bill?
I have a microphone. There's talk about getting intergenerational communication I think one of the issues that we need to think about is how social media can be used and how to communicate, how it's used between generations. You know, I have to admit I'm stupid. I don't know what's going on with social media. You know, all I know is I know the terminology. I know Twitter, I know Facebook, I know the terms, but I don't know how they work. So how do we get people like me involved?
Not the social media. I don't know what to say about social media. Other people can say that. Just to add on to what Kristin was saying about the progressives, she described, the Nisei progressives is a really good example. They're really interested in, how to change the country. So they really supported Henry Wallace. He was a guy that in 1948, I don't know if you believe it, but he was for redress and reparations back then, and against all kinds of colonialism and imperialism. And it was really, really, Wilbur, who was Sato, who was one of our members, obviously, he can't be up here, but he was one of the backers of Wallace back then, and it was very controversial, but I think it sets a really great example. And I think that, the great work that NCR and UK Progressives have been doing, at the end of the day, if you go towards, some kind of a national group where everybody can just hook up together, you could pass legislation together, you could, just like NCR used to do. That was our origin. We didn't just complain or protest, we passed legislation. We passed proactive, positive legislation that made changes. So whether it's immigration laws or any other kind of laws, I think we look back to our roots. It was like we protested, but we also changed things proactively.
Yeah, so in terms of social media, I think it's really important not to think of so there is a lot that happens within certain social media spaces that I think if everybody wants to take the time to learn how to navigate Twitter and navigate Facebook and all of that, I would highly encourage you to. At the same time, even for those of us who are digital natives, quote, it's absolutely exhausting and sometimes absurd. So it may not be worth your time. I think though that does speak to the question though of accessibility. So when we are talking about a campaign, when we are talking about working towards a goal, how are we making campaigns accessible, right? And I see social media as an accessibility tool to make it more accessible to a wider reach of people. Sometimes there aren't people who are able to make it to the rally, sometimes there aren't people who are able to make it to the meeting, sometimes it could be because of their own ability to, or maybe their work schedule, et cetera, et cetera. So social media provides one way to engage people. At the same time, you can't go the other way, right? You can't just have a campaign where it's only social media with absolutely no component that exists outside of the digital world. So I would say it's, to me, the lesson of social media is not everybody needs to be learning how to use Twitter. In fact, less people should be on Twitter, I think. It's not that everybody needs to be on Twitter, it's that we just need to build campaigns that are more 360. That account for all the different ways that people show up, all the ways that people can show up, and all the ways that people are engaged.
Well, I was just going to say to Phil, I think maybe take baby steps. Facebook is a very friendly thing. I mean, there's all these different pages. One I would recommend maybe is, you're Japanese American when, ... or all things Japanese American. And you talk about Japanese American topics, and you see a lot of people that you probably know. You ask them to become your friend, you see what they write about, and it's a great way to get in touch with people you haven't talked to for a long time. And then, it becomes more of a normalized situation. You see oh, this is actually a good thing. I get to, stay in touch with a lot of people that I would not have known are out there, so that's a start. The Twitter thing and the Instagram is something else, so. But I think Facebook is a nice way to start. It's not that intimidating.
We're going to probably not have time for any more questions because it's kind of at the end of the program. We want to make sure that you have time to talk to people afterwards, and there's also refreshments. But I want to thank all of the panelists, every single one of you, for sharing, because this is a wealth of information right here. And also, Joy Yamaguchi again. She's wearing a Janum hat, but she's also Nikkei Progressives, and she spoke for us at the benefit. Thank you to all of you who came to the benefit. We got your background. I also want to ask if there's anybody here that wrote for the book, because you're going to be signing the book if you would like. I recognize Mike Yanagita wrote for the book, and Susie Katsu, anybody else here that has an article? Edna and Patty? Okay, don't be shy. Okay, so if you buy the book, many of these people can sign it for you. So the book is out there, the DVD is out there, and T-shirts from Nikkei Progressives is out there as well. I hope that you have questions for people outside and you stick around. So, thank you again. Thank you for the panelists, and thank you all for coming today.